Blood dripped onto white marble as the most feared mafia boss in Seoul collapsed to his knees. Guns surrounded him. Glass shattered. Alarms screamed. But his eyes weren't on the attackers. They were on an elderly black woman gripping a wooden cane, his maid's grandmother. "Halmoni," he whispered, bowing so deeply his forehead touched the floor. Seconds later, a gunshot rang out. He threw himself in front of her. The devil of Seoul took a bullet meant for love. 3 days earlier, no one knew why he would kneel. It's a new year, and while others scroll past stories like this, you stayed. That means you care, you feel, you don't want to miss moments that remind us we're alive. So subscribe, join this family, and tell me where you're watching from. Your presence matters more than you think today. They say Seoul never sleeps. But the man who owned its shadows did so without dreams. Kang Dae-hyun stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, hands clasped behind his back, watching the city bleed neon into the pre-dawn fog. 34 floors below, the world moved according to invisible strings, strings he pulled without ever raising his voice. At 34, Kang had built an empire that existed in 2 realms. To the public, he was the brilliant CEO of Titan Logistics, a tech conglomerate that moved everything from semiconductors to luxury vehicles across 3 continents. To those who understood power's true language, he was something else entirely, the architect of Seoul's most sophisticated criminal network, a man who had turned information, fear, and precision into an art form. He didn't carry guns. Didn't need to. His reputation carved paths through concrete. The penthouse reflected its owner. Cold geometry, obsidian surfaces, minimal furniture. Everything had a place. Everything obeyed a function. There were no photographs, no plants, no evidence that anything soft or sentimental had ever existed within these walls. The space operated on 3 absolute rules: no visitors, no exceptions, no second chances. Kang had destroyed business partners for showing up unannounced, had ended family connections over unwanted holiday gatherings. His home was his fortress, his sanctuary from a world filled with people who wanted things, expected things, needed things. He required only one presence, his maid. Naomi had been invisible for so long, she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be seen. 28 years old, 5'4", with hands perpetually dry from industrial cleaning solutions and eyes trained to never meet anyone's gaze directly. She moved through the penthouse like a ghost, arriving before dawn, departing after dusk, existing in the spaces between Kang's routines. She knew his schedule better than he did. Knew he took his coffee at 6:47 a.m., black, exactly 185 degrees. Knew he couldn't sleep if there were fingerprints on the bathroom mirror. Knew the specific angle his shoes must face in the closet. Perfection wasn't optional. It was survival. The salary was extraordinary, more than she could have earned anywhere else in Seoul, more than her education or experience justified. Kang paid for flawless obedience, and Naomi delivered it without question because everyone she earned had a sacred destination. Her grandmother Esther, 14,000 kilometers away in a Memphis care facility that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. Esther, who'd raised her after the accident. Esther, whose memory was slowly being stolen by dementia's cruel mathematics. Esther, who was the only family Naomi had left. So she endured. She bowed. She erased herself. She followed the rules. Until the night the rules became impossible. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, jarring Naomi from fitful sleep in her cramped studio apartment in Gangnam. "Miss Park." The night nurse's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone delivering bad news professionally. "Your grandmother has had an episode. She left the facility during the overnight shift. We found her 6 blocks away, confused and hypothermic. She's stable now, but what?" Naomi's heart hammered against her ribs. "The facility can no longer guarantee her safety. We're recommending either 24-hour supervision at an increased rate of," the nurse named a figure that made Naomi's vision blur, "or transfer to a secured memory care unit. However, given the incident, we need you to make arrangements for her temporary care while we process the paperwork. We'll need her picked up within 48 hours. 48 hours? I'm in Korea, I can't just. I understand this is difficult. But facility policy is clear. The call ended. Naomi sat in the darkness of her apartment, phone trembling in her hands, doing impossible mathematics. Plane tickets. Time off she didn't have. Money she couldn't access. No friends close enough to ask for help this massive. No family but Esther herself. The hospital arranged emergency transport. Esther would arrive in Seoul in 36 hours. But there was nowhere to take her. Naomi's studio was barely large enough for one person, and her landlord had explicit rules against long-term guests. That's when the terrible idea took root. The penthouse. 30 rooms. Kang traveled frequently for business. The sunroom in the East Wing. He never went there, never even acknowledged its existence. She could hide Esther there. Just for a few days. Just until she found a solution. Just this once. Esther arrived on a Thursday morning while Kang was in Busan negotiating a shipping contract. Naomi met her at Incheon Airport, heart fracturing at the sight of her grandmother, 76 years old, wrapped in a donated coat, eyes bright but distant, looking at Naomi like a familiar stranger. "Baby girl," Esther murmured, using the nickname from Naomi's childhood. "Where are we?" "Somewhere safe, Grandma. I promise." She smuggled Esther into the penthouse through the service entrance, hands shaking as she keyed in the security code. Settled her in the sunroom with blankets, water, snacks. Made her promise to stay quiet, stay still. "Just a few days," Naomi whispered, kissing her grandmother's forehead. "I'll fix this." Esther smiled, already forgetting the promise being made. 3 days passed like held breath. Kang remained in Busan. Naomi moved through her duties with mechanical precision, checking on Esther between tasks, her body flooded with adrenaline-laced exhaustion. It was working. It was actually working. Until Sunday evening, when Naomi was folding laundry in the service quarters and heard it. Soft humming. An old gospel hymn. Drifting from the sunroom, through the halls, filling the penthouse with sound it had never contained. Naomi's blood turned to ice. Then, the elevator. The distinctive ding that announced arrivals. Kang Dae-hyun was home. Kang Dae-hyun stepped into his penthouse at exactly 7:34 p.m., and the world rearranged itself around him the way it always did, with silence, precision, and fear. His security detail followed 3 paces behind. Minute-ho and Jae-sung, both former military, both chosen for their ability to end problems before they became complications. They read his moods the way sailors read storms, and tonight the air pressure was dangerously low. Blood decorated Kang's right knuckles in a pattern that suggested recent violence. His Tom Ford suit jacket hung open. His jaw carried the rigid tension of a man who'd spent 6 hours negotiating with people who'd forgotten what respect meant. The Busan meeting had required persuasion of the physical variety. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. Minute-ho moved immediately toward the bar to pour whiskey. 2 fingers, single malt, no ice. Jae-sung began the standard security sweep, eyes tracking sightlines, checking window locks, performing the ritual that kept Kang's sanctuary uncontaminated. Then Kang heard it. Humming. Soft, melodic, utterly impossible. A woman's voice carrying a tune he hadn't heard in 2 decades, rising and falling through the penthouse like smoke through still air. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Every molecule in his body went rigid. Minute-ho's hand moved to his weapon. Jae-sung's sweep stopped mid-motion, his expression shifting from routine alertness to combat readiness. Someone was in the penthouse. Someone was singing. Kang didn't run. Men like him didn't run. But his walk toward the East Wing carried a velocity that made his security team's pulses spike. They flanked him automatically, weapons drawn, safeties off, following the sound to its impossible source. The sunroom. Kang shouldered through the door. Afternoon light poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning dust motes into floating gold. And there, seated in the leather armchair he'd never once sat in, surrounded by blankets and what appeared to be a half-eaten plate of rice and vegetables, was an elderly black woman. She wore a faded purple cardigan. Her silver hair caught the light like a halo. Her hands rested peacefully in her lap, and she was looking out at the Seoul skyline with the serene expression of someone admiring a garden she'd tended for years. Still humming. Get down. Hands where I can see them. Minato's voice cracked like a whip, weapon-trained centermass. The woman didn't flinch. Didn't even turn. Just kept humming, swaying slightly, lost in a world that existed beyond the weapons pointed at her head. Kang stood frozen, his mind fracturing into 1,000 calculations that all led to the same impossible conclusion. This shouldn't exist. This couldn't exist. No one entered his home. No one breached his security. No one, no. Naomi burst through the door behind them, her scream raw and animal. She hit the marble floor on her knees so hard the impact must have shattered something. Bone, cartilage, hope. Her hands clasped together, tears already streaming down her face. "Please," she sobbed, forehead pressed to the ground in the deepest bow Korean culture recognized. "Please, Mr. Kang, please don't hurt her. She's sick, she doesn't understand. Please, I'll do anything, kill me, punish me, but please don't." "Naomi, Esther said gently, finally turning from the window. Her eyes found her granddaughter on the floor and confusion rippled across her features. "Baby, why are you crying? Get up off that floor." "Grandma, please," Naomi whispered, voice breaking. "Please be quiet, please, I'm so sorry, I'm so." But Esther wasn't looking at Naomi anymore. She was looking at Kang. Her head tilted slightly, the way birds examine unexpected sounds. Her eyes, brown and distant and somehow impossibly present, traveled across his face with the slow recognition of memory trying to surface through fog. "Young man," she said softly, "do I know you?" Kang couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The entire architecture of his carefully constructed control was collapsing, and he couldn't stop it, couldn't shore up the walls fast enough to prevent what was rising through him like floodwater. Esther squinted, leaning forward. Then her face transformed, not with certainty, but with the ghost of something that lived deeper than her damaged memory. And she spoke a name that had been dead for 17 years. Hyun-woo. The penthouse stopped existing. Time folded. Reality bent. Every carefully constructed wall Kang had built between his past and present crumbled to dust. That name. His real name. The one he'd buried along with everything soft, everything weak, everything human. The name a terrified 13-year-old boy had carried before the world taught him that survival required transformation. Before he became Kang Dae-hyun. Before he became the man who never bowed. His knees hit the marble. The sound echoed through the sunroom like a gunshot. Minato and Jae-sung's weapons lowered in reflexive shock. Their boss, their untouchable commander, the man who'd built an empire on the foundation of never yielding, was kneeling. Not strategically. Not as manipulation. But in absolute, unconscious surrender. Kang's hands pressed flat against the floor. His forehead followed. The bow of a child. The bow of someone returning home after an impossible exile. "Halmione," he whispered, and his voice fractured on the word. "Grandmother." The honorific he'd sworn never to speak again. Wetness hit the marble beneath his face. He was crying. Kang Dae-hyun, who'd tortured men without blinking, who'd orchestrated murders over breakfast, who'd perfected emotional detachment into an art form, was crying. Behind him, Minato and Jae-sung stood paralyzed, their entire understanding of reality experiencing critical failure. Naomi remained on her knees, confusion and terror warring across her tear-stained face, unable to process what she was witnessing. The devil had just knelt before an elderly woman with dementia. The untouchable had just broken. Esther looked down at the man prostrated before her, at the broad shoulders shaking with 17 years of buried grief, at the blood still decorating his knuckles. Her expression softened into something gentle and heartbreaking. She reached out with one weathered hand, fingers trembling slightly, and touched the top of his head with the tenderness of blessing. Then she squinted, confusion returning like fog rolling back in. "Young man," she asked gently, her voice carrying the innocent bewilderment of a mind unmoored from time, "why are you crying?" 17 years earlier, Memphis, Tennessee. The alley behind Sweet Mercy Baptist Church smelled like rotting garbage and defeat. 13-year-old Park Hyun-woo pressed himself against the dumpster, ribs screaming from where his uncle's boot had connected 3 hours earlier, and tried to remember what warmth felt like. 2 months in America. 2 months since his mother's overdose. 2 months of being passed between relatives who saw him as burden, mouth to feed, evidence of family shame. His uncle had made it clear, earn your keep or get out. So Hyunwoo got out. November in Memphis wasn't Seoul's brutal winter, but cold was cold when you had nowhere to go. He'd stolen a coat from a donation bin, eaten from trash cans, learned which streets to avoid after dark. Survival had become mathematics. Stay invisible, stay moving, stay alive. He was failing at all three. "Child, what are you doing in my dumpster?" The voice came from above, warm, firm, carrying the particular authority of women who'd raised generations and wouldn't tolerate nonsense. Hyunwoo looked up into the face of an elderly black woman holding a bag of kitchen trash, her expression somewhere between concern and exasperation. He ran. Made it 6 blocks before his body gave out, collapsing against a chain-link fence, lungs burning, vision swimming. When he opened his eyes, she was there again, this time with a blanket and a thermos. "You done running, baby?" Esther asked. "Good. 'Cause these old knees don't chase like they used to." She didn't ask questions. Didn't demand explanations. Just wrapped him in the blanket, poured hot soup into the thermos cap, and waited while he devoured it with shaking hands. "You got a name?" "Hyunwoo," he whispered. "Well, Hyunwoo, I'm Sister Esther. And you're gonna come home with me now." It wasn't a request. For 8 months, Esther's small house became the only heaven Hyunwoo had ever known. She fed him, taught him English alongside her granddaughter Naomi, a shy 5-year-old who'd recently lost her parents, corrected his homework, made him wash dishes and pull weeds and attend Sunday services, called him my son like the words cost nothing, like love was something abundantly renewable. Hyunwoo had never believed in God. But he believed in Esther. "You're gonna do something important," she told him once, hands covered in flour, teaching him to make biscuits. "Can see it in your eyes. You got purpose, baby. Just gotta choose which kind." He'd made promises then. Childish, sincere promises about returning, repaying, making her proud. Then his uncle found him. Dragged him back to Seoul. Back to fists and hunger and a world that taught him the only power that mattered was the kind you took with your bare hands. Hyunwoo didn't just survive. He transformed. Learned to fight, to strategize, to bury every soft thing that made him vulnerable. By 16, he'd joined his first gang. By 20, he'd orchestrated his first hostile takeover. By 25, he'd erased Park Hyunwoo entirely and become Kang Dae-hyun. The boy who'd believed in biscuits and blessings died somewhere along the way. But he'd never forgotten the woman who'd called him son. Present day. Kang remained on his knees for 7 minutes. When he finally rose, his face had been reorganized into something approaching composure, but his eyes carried the haunted look of a man who'd just touched a part of himself he'd thought successfully amputated. "Minute ho. Jae-sung." His voice emerged steady, absolute. "You will forget everything you've seen in this room. Sister Esther is Halmione, grandmother. She is untouchable. Anyone who threatens her, questions her presence, or fails to treat her with absolute reverence will answer to me personally. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Both men bowed, though confusion still rippled beneath their professional masks. Kang turned to Naomi, who remained on the floor, tears drying on her face, incomprehension written across her features. "Stand up," he said quietly. She obeyed, trembling. "You brought her here to save her." "Not a question. You risked everything." I had nowhere else. I know I broke the rules, I know." "You protected family." Something unfamiliar moved through his expression. "You're no longer my maid, Naomi. You're family now. My sister. Everything I have is yours. Everything I can do, I will." Naomi's knees nearly buckled. "Mr. Kang, I can't." "Dae-hyun," he corrected. Then, softer, or Hyung, if you prefer. "Brother." The following days unfolded like a fever dream. Kang, Dae-hyun, converted the entire East Wing into Esther's domain. Hired private nurses. Brought in specialists. Spent hours sitting with her in the sunroom, listening to her stories, some lucid, some lost in time shuffle. "Boy, sit up straight," Esther scolded during dinner, dementia granting her brief windows of clarity. "I didn't raise you to slouch like some hoodlum." The most feared man in Seoul's underworld straightened his spine immediately. Yes, Halmione. Naomi watched these transformations with surreal wonder, her ruthless employer letting Esther feed him soup, correct his manners, pat his cheek like he was still 13 and promising to be good. The devil had become a boy again. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. Because power abhors vulnerability, and Seoul's shadows had eyes. Gangnam District, rival territory Choi Sung-min studied the surveillance photographs spread across his desk, a slow smile carving through his scarred face. 20 years building his empire in Kang's shadow, 20 years as second best, and finally, the untouchable had revealed his pressure point. An old woman. An American woman. Living in Kang's fortress like a queen. How long has she been there? Sung-min asked his intelligence officer. 4 days. He's restructured his entire schedule around her care. Dismissed meetings. Delayed shipments. His weak. Sung-min tapped the photograph of Esther in the sunroom, sunlight painting her silver hair gold. The man who never bowed just found something worth kneeling for. He'd spent 2 decades waiting for Kang to make a mistake. And now, gift-wrapped in dementia and gospel hymns, his enemy had handed him the perfect weapon. Love. Assemble the team, Sung-min ordered. Quiet. Professional. I want surveillance on every entrance, every routine, every vulnerability. And then we remind Kang Dae-hyun why powerful men don't keep family. Kang's penthouse. 2:47 a.m. Naomi woke to silence that felt wrong. The penthouse always hummed, climate control, security systems, the ambient noise of a building breathing. But now, nothing. She reached for her phone. Dead. The backup generator should have kicked in immediately. She moved into the hallway, heart beginning to hammer. Emergency lights should have activated. But the darkness was absolute, broken only by Seoul's neon bleeding through windows. In the distance, barely audible, car engines. Multiple. Idling. Naomi ran toward Esther's room, panic rising like floodwater. Behind her, through the penthouse's vast windows, black sedans positioned themselves at every exit. And every single light in the building went out. The first bullet shattered the chandelier. Kang heard it before he saw it, glass exploding like stars across marble, the sharp crack of gunfire splitting the night. His instincts kicked in before thought could. He was already moving, already calculating exits, threats, angles of attack. Naomi. Esther. Panic room, now. They ran. Footsteps pounded behind them through the corridor, shadows pouring through smoke and shattered windows. Kang's men returned fire, but the attackers were organized, precise. This wasn't random. This was coordinated. He slammed his palm against the biometric scanner. Nothing. Red light blinked mockingly. What's wrong? Naomi's voice was steady, but her hand trembled on Esther's shoulder. It's not responding. Kang struck the panel again. Sabotage. Someone had gotten inside his systems, inside his walls, inside his world. A shadow rounded the corner. Kang shoved Naomi and Esther behind him, raising his weapon. But the attacker was faster, trigger already squeezed, barrel trained on his daughter. Esther stepped forward. No. Kang's roar tore from somewhere primal as he lunged. His body collided with hers, twisting, shielding. The bullet meant for her heart buried itself in his shoulder instead. Pain exploded white-hot through him. He staggered but didn't fall. Couldn't fall. Not while they still breathed. The attacker closed in. Kang dropped his gun, useless now with his arm screaming, and met the man with fists instead. Bone cracked against bone. Blood sprayed. The world narrowed to instinct and survival, every punch fueled by the terror of losing them. He was slowing. Blood loss dragging him down. The attacker sensed it, pressed harder. Then a gunshot. The man dropped. Naomi stood behind him, weapon raised, hands shaking but eyes clear. She'd never fired a gun before tonight. Now she'd saved his life with one. The mansion fell silent. Sirens wailed in the distance. Kang's men secured the perimeter, dragging bodies away. The rival syndicate had gambled everything on this attack. They'd lost. But so had Kang. He collapsed against the wall, vision blurring, Esther's scream echoing as darkness pulled him under. White ceiling. Antiseptic smell. The steady beep of monitors. Kang woke to Esther's hand clutching his, her face buried against the hospital bed rail. Tears soaked the thin blanket. "Dad." Her voice broke on the word. "I thought you were gone again." His throat tightened. Through the haze of morphine and exhaustion, he saw her, really saw her, not as the child he'd abandoned, but as the girl who'd grown up without him. Who'd learned to be strong because he hadn't been there to protect her. "Esther." His voice was gravel. "I'm sorry." She looked up, red-eyed. "I'm sorry I left you," he continued. Words he'd buried for years finally clawing free. "Sorry I chose power over being your father. Sorry I made you afraid instead of safe. I can't take back those years. But I'm here now. And I'm not leaving again." She sobbed, fingers tightening around his. "You took a bullet for me. I'd take 1,000 more." Naomi stood in the doorway, watching them. Something in her expression had softened, the wall she'd built against him crumbling in the face of what she'd witnessed. He hadn't just fought to protect them. He'd been willing to die for them. She stepped forward, placing her hand over theirs. "We're still standing. All of us." Kang met her eyes. In them, he saw forgiveness beginning to take root. Not for what he'd been, but for what he was becoming. "Love," Naomi whispered. "That's what saved us. Not your empire. Not your weapons. Love." 6 weeks later, Kang stood in the mansion's main hall. The bullet holes had been patched, the shattered glass replaced. But something fundamental had changed. The panic room was gone, torn out completely. In its place, Esther had asked for a library. Shelves lined the walls now, filled with books instead of weapons. Naomi had added photographs to the tables, Esther's school pictures, moments Kang had missed, moments they'd create together now. The mansion was no longer a fortress. It was a home. His men still protected the perimeter, but differently now. No longer guarding a tyrant's paranoia, but a family's peace. Kang walked to the garden where Naomi tended roses. Esther sat nearby, reading. Normal. Quiet. Everything his life had never been. He knelt beside the flower bed. Naomi glanced at him, surprised. The devil of Seoul, kneeling in dirt, hands gentler than they'd been in decades. "Thank you," he said simply, "for not giving up on me when you should have." Esther looked up from her book, a smile breaking across her face. Naomi touched his shoulder, the one that still ached where the bullet had torn through. "You're welcome." He'd spent his life making others kneel. Building an empire on fear, on violence, on the myth that power meant never bowing to anyone. But here, in this garden, with these two people who'd seen him at his worst and loved him toward his best, Kang understood the truth he'd been too blind to see. Power was not who kneels to you. It was who you were willing to kneel for. Thank you for staying till the end. Most people click away, but you didn't, and that means something. Don't disappear now, subscribe, stay close this year, and keep walking with us through these stories. Comment, share, and tell me where you're watching from. Your voice matters more than you know today.